So Jared Harris, tell us a little bit about what initially attracted you to the Terror. What made you want to be a part of it?
The first thing that I got was the script to episode 1, and I immediately knew that, it was not just really well written, but the thing that I appreciated about it was the patience and the restraint in the storytelling. I'm sure they would have had quite a lot of pressure since it was in the horror genre, to put a lot of different elements into that first episode, and they were very content with establishing a sort of a mood and a feel and a world, and introducing you to the characters, and not feeling pressured to suddenly start delivering genre beats to you. So, and I love that, and that's one of the questions that I asked David and Sue once I met them, having read that first episode, was, is this what the rest of it's going to be like, or does it descend into a lot of people running away screaming at a monster chasing them? And he said, no, this is what it's going to be like. The monster's really a metaphor. We want to hold back on that, which of course is rule 1 of monster storytelling, is you can never see the monster.
Mm-hmm. Well, it also offers you a really great part to play. Can you tell us a little bit about the character Francis Crozier?
That too, yes. I did leave that bit out, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a really good part. Oh my God. Yes, because and in that sense, after Mad Men, I'd spoken to my managers and my manager and agent about doing television again, and I had a great experience on Mad Men, but there would be weeks where I would go and I would never get near set. I wasn't needed, and I knew that if I signed up to another television show, I wanted to be in the thick of it. So this one came along, and it was the lead in the television show, and it was incredibly well written. So yeah, it was like Christmas, really.
Tell us a little bit about the character you play, Captain Francis Crozier.
Captain Francis Crozier, he is second in command of the Franklin expedition. He is an Irishman. He's a British subject. He's of Northern Irish descent. He was a sort of fully signed up member of the British Empire, if you like, and promoting the British Empire. But has found that there's a glass ceiling to his advancement. He is an experienced Antarctic and Arctic explorer, and he's a bachelor. And of course, in the context of our story, that's significant in the sense that as part of his motivation for wanting to take this voyage, to prove himself to his object of affection, if you like. He likes whiskey. He enjoys a little tipple, and he's sort of leaning on that crutch a little bit too heavy. There was an interesting thing that I discovered once I signed up for it, was there are these letters that Crozier wrote right before they head off into the Arctic Circle. Some of them were to his friends James Ross, and it's a really interesting snapshot of what this man's state of mind was. And it was quite sad in that he had basically understood that at this point of his life, he had nothing except this life in the Royal Navy, and that he'd been rejected by Sophia, and that he was never going to know any kind of companionship or love beyond the comradeship that he had for his fellow explorers.
You mentioned his letters, and I was going to ask, what kind of research you did in order to, I guess, get inside the mind of this guy. Was there any other kind of research that you did into the actual expedition, or?
Yeah, once I signed on, I read the book. Then I started to dig into all of there's quite a few factual books on the expedition. There's actually one on Crozier himself called Last Man Standing. There's a really fascinating documentary called, I think, The Great White Silence or something like that, which was Scott's expedition to the Antarctic, I think it was it? And they actually took documentary, film was in its nascent stage, and they took filmmakers with them. And so you can see real footage from that time period of those guys heading off into the Antarctic, and right before they set off on their journey with all the sleds and everything. So all that sort of information is really helpful. At the end of the day, it is an imaginary exercise, and they didn't encounter, as far as we know, any mythical creatures or anything like that. But you know, it's important. Those sorts of things are really useful to understanding the sort of the rules of society that people operated under. You know, yeah, stuff like that.
Well, right. I mean, if anything, I guess it sort of helps put you into 1848, I think, is when this takes place. So, I mean, I guess it's beneficial in that way, right?
Yeah, hugely beneficial, and of course, although we are the same, you know, we're humans, they were humans. Their understanding of the rules and the guidelines that they operate under in terms of what's permissible, what's expected, what is you know, acceptable behavior and what isn't, they're all very different. So, and those are tiny little things that inform hesitations within a scene, or responses to the way someone, the way a thought is phrased by somebody else, and all that stuff is incredibly important to understand. And the only way you can do it is just to immerse yourself in the culture of that period, of that time period. So, you know, just reading poetry and reading the fiction of the time and listening to the music, it's all helpful. David and Sue actually had a viewing list of 10 movies they wanted us to watch. And they were kind of fascinating because they weren't obvious films. There was Picnic at Hanging Rock was one of them. You know, Howard's End was another one. So they weren't sort of obvious sort of genre films like The Thing or something like that, or Alien, which I guess they just assumed we'd already seen. You know,
right, with the Ridley Scott connection. To that end, also, I thought one of the interesting aspects about your character is, I mean, you mentioned the fact that he's Irish and that there's a glass ceiling to his advancement. I thought it was interesting the way that they dealt with the fact that, you know, there's only a certain level that he can get to because he's Irish, and because at this time the Irish are discriminated against. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's actually factually based. They were confident they would find the Northwest Passage on this trip, and to that end, they wanted the fame to go to an Englishman. So they, although he was putatively second in command, Fitzjames was there as the visible second in command, if you like, and Fitzjames was given the responsibility for crewing out the ships. And again, in that respect, they didn't take a lot of Scottish and Welsh and Irish people who had a lot of more experience at sailing into these conditions, and they took a lot of English people because they wanted the guy up in the crow's nest who spots it for the first time to be an Englishman, you know. You know, in terms of that time period, what was interesting about that, and it fueled one's understanding of the character, was the concept of Irish republicanism was just starting to take root when he was a young boy, and his father was adamantly opposed to it. He was absolutely staunchly British, and he was raised in that family and then in that household. And he joins the Royal Navy and promotes the cause of the empire and the crown around the globe. And that sense of betrayal was tremendously important in my mind. So it wasn't just the betrayal that he felt from Franklin over the not being given permission to marry his ward, Sophia, or being, subtly overlooked in this job in terms of being able to lead it. There was this sort of propulsion, if you like, a boomerang effect of a feeling of having given the best years of his life to promoting a cause that he wasn't considered to be good enough to carry the flag for, carry the torch for. I don't know if that answers your question, but
I think you did. You bring up Captain John Franklin, played by the great Ciarán Hinds. Can you talk a bit about the dynamic between the two of them and about working with Ciarán Hinds?
Well, the dynamic between Crozier and Franklin was, and it's one that's mirrored in different relationships throughout the whole story. It was a sort of father-son relationship. And he had definitely taken Crozier under his wing. Crozier had been, Franklin had been the governor of Australia when Crozier and Ross were exploring the Antarctic, and they had been received by Franklin before and then after they went on this expedition, and he'd been very generous and very courteous towards him, but ultimately had denied him permission to marry Sophia because he considered the match to be beneath her because of his background. His background partly, but also because his prospects for advancement weren't good, again because of his background. What was my relationship like with Ciarán? I mean, both with Ciarán and Tobias, I fanboyed over them big time when I first met them, because I absolutely love Rome. It's one of my favorite television shows. I must have seen it about 4 or 5 times. So I just bored them endlessly with questions about it, to the point where they would go, "Jared, we're about to shoot the scene, could you stop? Let's go out and have a drink and talk about it later." Ciarán is such a wonderful, not just wonderful actor, he's such a lovely man. He's got this tremendous power and gravitas, and then in real life he has this beautiful sort of kind of a very, very ephemeral air to him. He has this lovely way with language and a very, very light touch. I enjoyed his company immensely, and there were a couple of nights where we would find ourselves at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning at the all-night pub around the corner from the hotel, chatting the night away on our day off, I have to.
Right. Take us on to the set. I mean, because it's a very physically demanding story where you guys are out in the cold and the snow and all of this. So tell us a little bit about working in the elements, as it were.
Well, yeah, it's always a bit of a shock when you tell people we were nowhere near the North Pole, we were nowhere near any ice. It was cold because Budapest is very cold in the winter. The production saved themselves a lot of money because they were going to refrigerate their studios to get that breath quality. But for the first couple of months, they didn't need to. But in terms of the circumstances, let's see, the sets, they built 3 decks of the ship. So they had the exterior hull, the upper deck with the masts, and that was the one that you see trapped in the ice. And they had a stage set for that. That was spectacular. It was, you'd sort of walk onto set and they'd be pumping dry ice and smoke onto the set before you come onto set to go and start shooting. And you sort of walk up there and you just see this prow of the ship just emerge through the smoke and the dry ice. And it was incredibly evocative. All the CGI stuff that the people talked about with the show, that's all the stuff that's in the panorama. It was practical sets for everything else. Then they had the second deck was the first deck below deck, and that was the quarters. That's where they had the captain's quarters, the officers' quarters, The crew quarters were where their hammocks were slung, but it was also where they ate, which was also right next to the cook's station where he would make the food. And then at the other end of that, farther end of that, was the what do you call it? The not the hot. I wouldn't call it a hospital, but it was
infirmary.
The infirmary. Thank you so much. And what one got out of that was this intense sense of claustrophobia, because you couldn't be up on deck for very long because it was so cold that you would only go up on deck unless you were ordered up on deck. The rest of the time you spent below decks, where it was so hot because of the they had a heating system there that you basically had to strip off to your underwear. We didn't do this part because it was too difficult to explain this why to the audience, but it was actually so hot below decks that if you kept all your gear on that you had above deck, you'd just start sweating, but they would anyway. And then when they went back on deck, they'd put their clothes on, but that layer of sweat would freeze against their skin when they went up on deck, and it would happen instantly. Then the third deck they had was the engine room, and where they had all the supplies and the water casks and everything. But I mean, it was all built to scale. They actually, David told a funny story of, there was they discovered a guy who was building a model, scaled down model of the Terror, and David called him up and said, "How would you like to come to Budapest and help us build a 2-scale model of this ship? Because we understand you've been working on the the model version, but we're going to do the life size." So that his head exploded. He was like a kid. I remember him coming to set, seeing the whole thing, because he sent them all the maps and the diagrams and everything that he put together through his research for the Maritime Museum. And when he came on deck, you saw the whole thing. It was like a kid at Christmas.
Right. Now, you are an Emmy nominee for Mad Men, which also brought you a SAG Ensemble Award. You're also nominated at SAG for Benjamin Button, and I think 3 more times for Mad Men, 2 or 3 more times. You're also a BAFTA nominee for The Crown. So what does that kind of recognition mean?
Lincoln was nominated for a SAG
Lincoln,
Award.
yes, that's what it was. Thank you, yes. So what does that recognition mean for you?
Not much. I mean, I don't think it's like suddenly the phone starts ringing more or anything like that. I think it helps. It helps in terms of you look for quality projects to be attached to, and hopefully that catches up with you. But at the end of the day, not much. And this is that side of it is all driven by the business side of it, and the business side of it is driven by bums on seats. So if they think you can put bums on seats, then they call you up and they knock on your door. And if they don't think that, then you're another actor looking for a job.
Right. Well, I'm glad that you got this job, Jared Harris, because and I look forward to many more jobs from you as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a couple more coming up.
Well, thank you so much, and congratulations on The Terror. Appreciate your time. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. Same.